Hi, this is Michael Azarad, Editor-in-Chief of the Talkhouse, and welcome to the Talkhouse Music Podcast. This episode of the Talkhouse Music Podcast features a conversation between celebrated singer-songwriter Matthew E. White and Delta Spirit lead singer Matt Vasquez. Both Matthew and Matt are very accomplished, very experienced songwriters, musicians, and producers. So even if they make fairly different kinds of music, and they'd never met before, we figured they'd have a lot to talk about. And they did. We put them together in a hotel room in Austin, Texas, complete with a commanding view of I-35, and they were very curious about each other and talked about lots of stuff, their surprising influences, their working methods, and exactly what is the connection between Matthew E. White and Pharrell. Here's how it went down.
I Wikipedia'd you, Big Matt.
I also Wikipedia'd you.
I figured that would happen. So, I mean, I guess we can troll through our own Wikipedias.
Yeah.
And how much that shit's like. I really appreciate the how brief yours is. It's just, it's nice. It's pure. Wow. It's like you play music. That is truth. You're from Richmond, Virginia. Are you actually from Richmond, like in Richmond?
Yeah. Well, I grew up in Virginia Beach.
Oh, BB.
Yeah. Are you familiar?
Well, do you know Justin Timberlake? And who else is from there? There's that
Justin
producer.
Justin Timberlake's not from there. Pharrell's from there.
Pharrell's from there. I thought Justin Timberlake was from BB.
No, he recorded a record there.
Oh, okay. But Timberland too, though, right?
Timbaland's from there. Missy Elliott's from there.
Yeah.
Blackstreet's from there. Teddy Riley's from there.
Nice.
So I actually grew up with there was a guy named Rob Olsch who owned a studio there, and it ended up being sort of the go-to studio for all those people. And I interned. By intern, I mean I painted the walls when I was like in 7th grade.
That's studio interning.
And but he ended up selling a studio to Pharrell. So.
Oh wow. Did you end up working in it when he owned it?
No. My dad. No, I have no connection really to Pharrell except for that my father was a high school principal and he was Pharrell's little brother's principal.
That's cool.
So it's kind of like smaller town stuff.
Smaller town.
Yeah.
Did you start using, or do you produce, right, and engineer stuff?
Produce.
So.
I don't really engineer. I'm a sort of a engineer if I have to kind of guy.
When did you? What format do you use? Like Pro Tools, Logic?
I use Logic and analog stuff. So we have an 8-track, 1-inch tape machine, a really nice one at the studio.
Otari?
We do that. It's one of those Morrow machines. Chris Morrow makes them.
Oh,
like MCI.
Yeah, the MCI updated
ones. So one of those, the studio, and then we dump into Logic, and we sort of have it so we can fly back and forth and do a lot of stuff like that.
That's fun.
So that's nice.
Yeah. When did you start using DAW and all that stuff?
Kind of by necessity. I started. I grew up just playing, and I recorded on 4-tracks and stuff like that, but I was always more about like being able to play my guitar better or whatever, And I went to music school, and I sort of had I don't know what to call it, sort of a light bulb kind of moment that was sort of like, well, if you're gonna make something, if you're gonna say something musically, sort of in this generation, like it needs to be recorded. I mean, it has to. It kind
of doesn't exist.
Yeah, exactly. It kind of doesn't exist if it's not, and it sort of has to interface with that. So then I sort of bought some stuff and kind of started to get used to it, and then I made my own record, and that sort of has sort of tumbled.
And that was the big
inner. Yeah.
It sounds really pretty, by the way. I
Thank
like
you.
the oceany-soulness of it.
Oh, that's good. That's a good description.
Yeah.
I like that. So where are you from originally?
I am a Cali-Texan. I was born in California and was really little. I moved here in Austin. And there's what's this, the 35? Yeah. So I grew up down that way, probably 5 miles, in a brand new subdivision that got built.
And how much of your life was here?
Until I was a freshman in high school, and my folks split up. My dad worked for Lockheed Martin out here, and then they closed in the 90s, and then I moved to California because I did too much acid my freshman year of high school, which is very much what 1998 looked like here in Austin, Texas, and still does.
And you moved to Southern California?
Yeah, Dana Point, and 5 people in a 2-bedroom, but on the beach.
Nice.
And my friend Kelly Winrich, who's in my band, his dad built a studio for the family musicians,
nice.
and they had the first Pro Tools Digio 1.
That's great.
So we would work senior year of high school. We would work on songs until we had to wake up to go to school the next day for my AP music theory class, which I didn't understand until like 3 years later.
Right.
Like what he was teaching me. 1, 3, 4, 5, 6.
That's cool.
Yeah, this stuff's fun. Delay.
That's cool. And then how'd you get into making records?
I
what was the
only
path from...
ever wanted to do this since I was about 7 years old. Right. My grandma's actually the 6th employee of Fender.
Oh,
and
nice.
so she sent all the grandson's guitars.
Oh, wow.
So my brother got a GNL prototype guitar, and
really
Leo
cool.
gave to her to give to him. And so
That's
that was just like
fantastic.
Nirvana. And as soon as I learned Come As You Are from a neighbor guy, I learned tablature.
That's
my brother
funny.
wanted to be Stevie Ray Vaughan here, and I wanted to be Kurt Cobain
Right.
and Randy Rhoads.
It's funny. Everyone our age learned Come As You Are.
Yeah,
That's the
it's like
first
the
thing
first
on
song.
the guitar. That's great.
It's such a good song to learn because it's almost impossible to play it and sing it at the same time.
Yeah.
And if you can if you can play and sing that song at the same time, you're good. Like you can do anything. Because it's the da 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 da.
Yeah, but the funny thing about that is that it's not Kurt playing that. It's the bass player playing it. That's what when I was younger, it was like, oh, Kurt sings and plays this, but he doesn't actually do that. What kind of music did you grow up on?
My mom's pretty heavy into Janis, Beatles, and Elvis.
Okay.
And
Are your parents like hippie age or sort of?
yeah, like so. My parents were born in 55.
Right. Okay.
Right around then, so that's kind of what we grew up on. Like my dad's favorite band was Pink Floyd, but he never was really outwardly interested in music, other than he just thought Pink Floyd was the most efficiently engineered music, kind of thing.
Right.
And my mom was really just about Janis's soul,
Right.
and told me at a young age, Matt, if you're ever gonna sing, you sing like this. And she's like, why, yeah, and it was always really fun, and a very loud, amiable mother.
Right.
Yeah. What about you?
It's interesting. My parents are 10 years older. They were born in the 44, and so I'm the youngest of 3, and I grew up more on, like, my parents are much more like Elvis era than Beatles era. They're
And there's a big split in the South about that, right?
They're not. Yeah, they're not really like hippies at all. So it's like they're like such classic like sock hop 50s.
that's so cool.
Like my dad
Jerry
has all these
Lee.
45s. Yeah, it's like that kind of music. And not that I really necessarily grew up with that, but that's sort of like the background that they brought to the table. I grew up on a lot of like Chuck Berry, Beach Boys, kind of like what is now called like oldies format.
Yeah,
but
golden
like,
era.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. And then listened to that for pretty exclusively. I had pretty much no interest in kind of modern stuff until 10 came out. And then I liked that. I love 10 so much.
Oh, yeah. My brother was just insane for 10.
And that kind of broke the ice a little bit. And it was pretty, I guess all that stuff happened when I was 11, 10, 11. And so 10 and Pearl Jam, Nirvana, Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, Alice in Chains, all that stuff was a big influence. But it's funny because it's funny to think back on that because, I grew up in a middle class, very suburban, white household, and like to think of kids like, and all my friends listen to that, but to think of that demographic, like just putting on Bleach or something and like going nuts.
Relating so
it's like
heavily to
relating so heavily to it. It's something you're completely unaware of at the time as being like why you
are so dark and depressed.
Yeah,
and insane.
why? Yeah, were you like that?
I was pretty insane. That's a jump.
I wasn't particularly like that, but I did relate to it in a. I don't know. I don't know why.
Maybe in a sense that music was like, it in itself is important. And amazing.
Yeah. It was. That was such an important thing. We have this conversation a lot in the van, about the greatest American rock and roll band.
Ooh.
Do you have an opinion on that? It's a tough question. So
it's tough because it's got to be an actual band.
Yeah.
It can't be like Tom Petty. I mean, the Heartbreakers are probably
it
like
could
the
be
best American band.
It could be the Heartbreakers.
But
I'd take that as an answer.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
but
say
that's
that
not
answer.
My answer either. And it's like you could say the Eagles too in terms of all this. Like it's just depends where you're coming on it. I mean, and the Byrds and the Beach Boys, but Beach Boys, it's not everybody's bringing everything to the table.
Not rocking too hard either.
Yeah.
I feel like this
like Nirvana is
the criteria we base it on is musicianship, like musicality, songwriting, like rockingness level.
Oh yeah.
And cultural relevance. So like someone like the Velvet Underground has like huge cultural relevance.
Yeah.
Kind of. And anyway, so we sort of rate people like that, but it's a really tough question to answer because there's bands like, you said a lot of them, the Beach Boys, the Byrds, the Underground comes up a lot, the Ramones, Tom Petty, Sly and the Family Stone is an interesting one that I get that we talk about. What is that? Does that count?
Why wouldn't it? War,
because
Parliament.
It's more like soul, soul music or R&B music, maybe.
Yeah, but isn't rock? What is rock music though?
Yeah,
too? Like,
well, yeah,
like you
I know
go
it's
rock and roll, and it's like it's basically sped up gospel, and it's
absolutely. And I think there's an interesting it's just an interesting discussion there especially about Sly. Sly is an interesting one because he does I think if you put on his set at Woodstock and you listen to that it's rocking like. Yeah. It's completely rocking, but a record like Fresh or something like that, it's like that's not rocking. That's not really rock and roll music.
Well, Santana Woodstock is like
the
best thing ever, but it's like
that's an interesting. No one said that. But Nirvana is interesting because truthfully, Nirvana really rates on all those categories. It's incredibly important culturally.
They're the biggest band and most important band in the world when music actually was important on its own.
Yeah,
whereas now that ever since that, I feel so bad for a generation that I can remember that time when music was so like your identity and the freedom of it was just enough.
Right.
And it's hard to get that sense when you never were born into it. Like the earliest, biggest thing that you knew was Spice Girls.
Yeah. And
so anything cool is just never gonna be big. Yeah. But I guess that doesn't really matter so long as it exists. But you would like that, just.
Yeah. I think music has a way of, it lives on its own. It finds the places where it's alive and it stays there.
Yeah.
And, it abandons the places that don't treat it right. And that's just how it lives, and it's interesting because I'm sure you get asked this kind of stuff a lot, but about like where's the music industry going, or how to Spotify or digital stuff, or like there's money just leaving the industry, like it's just not as big as it was, and there's not the support that there was 15 years ago even, and I kind of feel like, well, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about
I'm curious what you think
the direction of things?
It's always hard to stomach, like if you looked at copyright law and like where we would be at if we were 10 years older and had done what we've done, and wouldn't have to do as much corporate stuff as we do to even pay the rent and not be poor and hungry, and that would be a very real thing. Or live with my parents. And it's like the Spotify mold, though. There's certain things about it that seem a little scandalous on the backside, but the idea that it's like people would be willing to do a subscription service is great. And then it's finding the other subscription service after that one takes over that's like Whole Foods, like it's like co-op where the artist actually gets the fair rate that other artists up until since it's been recorded, to just have that right mechanical royalty.
Yeah.
To where we can survive. And then people, I feel like people want to be patrons. You know, people buy T-shirts. People still buy CDs and then they burn them. If they can't even put it on a computer, they just buy the CD because they feel bad for the band now. Yeah. So, but what's your take on it?
Well,
what's your futurist?
I guess my first big picture take is that we are not owed a music industry. Mm-hmm. Like, that is not something. There's plenty of places in the world where that doesn't exist, where you play your instrument because you love to play and you play it as much as you can, and people pay when they can, or whatever the case may be. But we're not owed that. So if things go to the, I think it's just important to note, to remember that as musicians,
the get to factor.
We just aren't owed. Jobs change, and the market changes, and there aren't as many professional clarinet players now as there were 50 years ago. Yeah. That's just the truth. And there aren't as many blacksmiths now as there were 100 years ago. And so you have to be, I think, self-aware about that, and that the scope of the professional nature of what you do can change over the course of time. Yeah. And so you kind of know, I think I just sort of say that to myself, that is the case. Yeah. But that's not why I play music. I play music because I have to, because I couldn't not play music. Yep. And that's just, so I will be whether my music has an audience or whether it's interfacing with sales and selling and money transactions of any kind, like, that's great. But if that wasn't happening, I would be playing anyway, and I would be making records anyway. And so I think for me, it's sort of about saying that kind of to myself first. With that said, I think, you said it well. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with a subscription service. No. And that's also important to know. And it is a complicated thing, because when you buy a record, if you pay $10 for a record, you have it for the rest of your life. So you can listen. If you listen to that record, let's say, just for numbers, you split it. You're splitting things 50-50 with a record label or something. So you buy it for $10. You $5 goes to the record label and $5 goes to the artist. If you listen to that record, as soon as you listen to that record 100 times, like, you've paid whatever you've paid, 50 cents for a song. As soon as you listen to it 1,000 times, you've paid 5 cents for a song. As soon as you listen to it, whatever the math is, it starts going down, and like, as many times as your dad has listened to his record of Dark Side of the Moon or whatever. Oh, it's like how much
pennies.
Yeah, like, how much money has he actually paid for that song?
And how much have I enjoyed it too? It's like you own a CD, and it just, like, you inherit vinyl too. I mean, like that.
Exactly.
Like, how many times you've played through those
and
records.
So it is complicated, because a Spotify play isn't the same as an iTunes purchase. It's worth much much less than that. It's just figuring out what the math is, and I think that'll work itself out. My feeling is that will work itself out. I don't think that it's correct now. Yeah. But I do think things like that, industries have a way of sort of balancing themselves, because I don't prefer to be particularly negative about it, although I don't think that we're at the end point.
I feel really hopeful about all that. I think it is going to head that way. I mean, it's inevitable that people are not going to buy physical CDs unless it's vinyl, unless it's an extremely high fidelity audiophile thing.
Do you how do you listen to music?
How do I listen to music? I have Spotify, and I use it to death, and I love it. I think their broadband streaming is better than. I'd rather listen to a song on iTunes on Spotify than iTunes or SoundCloud, just because the way
SoundCloud, it gets a little funny. It seems
like it degrades itself in MP3, and you're already running an MP3, even if you're running at the highest on Apple. You're always running through an amp into an amp off your phone, And I think the Spotify amp, it's little whatever EQ everything. it really is a little bit more deep. And I download all the songs. So, like everything offline. I love. So I'm offline and I just go back and I really am able to discover records that I wouldn't normally do, world music and having the record store. And I pay for it. Like a lot of us can get it for free and then you have to hassle somebody as a musician to get another 6-month license. I'd happily pay this. Right. And I wish everybody would so that it would come down, you know.
Yeah. Are you in the middle of an album cycle?
Yeah. I am, actually. Delta Spirits Into the Wide is out. We're going on tour right after this weekend for a spring thing. Great. And then we're actually going to do kind of a Last Waltz style tour where we're going to travel around in a bus. And our friends that sing in bands are going to hop on stage and join the band for the evening.
Great.
Yeah. And cover their songs and cover covers.
Nice.
Yeah.
And what's that record like?
It's like...
Where would you say it's coming from musically for someone who hasn't listened to it at all?
I don't know.
Which I apologize for.
No. It's fine. I mean, it's like... I think you would relate to this listening to your stuff, but it's like you write a song for the song's sake, and you believe in the song, in the lyrics, or whatever you're talking about in it, and the way that you sing it. And however that comes to fruition is what it is. It doesn't need... it doesn't need any more explanation than that. Right. You know, it's a rock and roll band, I guess. Right. It's indie because we're in the 20th century and it's post 1997. But other than that, it's just 5 friends with the goal of no shtick music for you to like the songs.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that.
And I feel like you're coming from a very similar place, if that's okay for me to
Well, the no shtick thing, I like that. I really try to be clear with my intentions and honest, just to make sure the music is what is coming first.
You just want to be yourself.
It's interesting how music sort of... I'll talk about the first single off my record is called Rock and Roll is Cold, which is like this tongue-in-cheek song.
Sounds great.
But thank you. But I get asked about, obviously at this point now I just get asked about it constantly about what do I mean and stuff like that. But I think it's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about how rock and roll, as part of its history, has always really interacted with culture and fashion. I don't mean just strictly clothing. I just mean style and cultural fashion as part of what it is, you know? It's always been really important, and there's part of me that really likes that, and I think it's been important to the music at times. There's also times where it's been, I think, a real hindrance to the music, where it becomes sort of the cart in front of the horse, you know, where it's more about, and you think you sort of see that since the 50s, really, you sort of see there's been times where it's like, oh, the music hasn't been...
We're going to wear matching suits, and that's the matching suit vocal band. And
I will say, though, I am wearing matching suits on stage.
That is totally classic, and there's nothing wrong with it. I want matching suits. So
it's good. It's a good look.
But the whole... I mean, that's fun to, like, point at, like, poke at Americana and do that. And there's nothing gross about being classic, as much as it is trying to, like, be like, we're relevant. We're a relevant artist. Yeah. Because I have this specific brand on, or I have this type of cut shirt. Right. And I have this step haircut. Yeah. And that all of a sudden makes what I do better. It makes my song better.
It's interesting. It's like it's not something I really. I guess it's something I'm aware of more than I fight. You know, it's just as someone who's not. I released music for so long, not in relation to an industry. You know, it's like I just put out records and no one gave a shit. You know, and it was like that was great. I didn't really have what I do now in terms of writing songs and recording records and touring on them and having an international audience and coming down to South by and doing things like that. That was never really like, it's been a little bit of a surprise, you know, to sort of get into this situation and I don't know.
And you're on LP2 now, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. But it's been really, I guess just seeing how much the music and the culture like interact, and now it's a lot, especially being at South by, you see it's like industry music and like the actual music, the actual notes that you play and what you record, and how that relates to business decisions and industry type decisions, but also relates to the culture of the time that we're in. We can't not be in, which is fine. It's just something that we don't think about that. Like, when I listen to like Motown records or something like that, it's like I just it's like I love that record.
Yeah, I just love that song.
Yeah, I just love that song, and you forget that music had the same sort of different elements, but it still had the same pressure on it, and the same. It was in the cultural cauldron of the time.
You said you found the soul of rock and roll. You said you found the soul of rock and roll. Hey, the rock and roll, it don't have no soul. Everybody knows that. Everyone knows. Everyone knows that rock and roll is cold. You said you found the key to R&B. You said you found the key to R&B. Hey, R&B, it don't have no key. Everybody sees that. Everyone sees. Everybody sees that R&B is free.
I really think this time is like an exciting time, because it's kind of like Elvis is at war and the Beatles haven't shown up yet.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of like producer songwriter machine based stuff where it's like I can make you like on the huge scale, like on the very top pop market.
Yeah.
There's like, I'm gonna make you a star. I have this amazing songwriting team, and we're gonna invest in you, like and make someone like Bruno Mars, who is extremely talented and deserving of that, the hugest pop star in the world. And then you have, but somehow we get to be still the subversive,
it is,
do what you want music, and how it's all going on at the same time is like mind-blowing.
Something I think is really interesting is so there's a sort of a time period, sort of post Sgt. Pepper's really, where far out music was really championed by like big labels, and Sgt. Pepper's did so well and was such a big, like a massive cultural earthquake, that all of a sudden you get like the Chess Cadet imprint, or you get Electric Mud, like those kind of records, or like the Motown West records, or like Dr. John, like the first Dr. John records in Babylon, and just a whole like explosion of these kind of super courageous, imaginative, but also well-funded records. And like that didn't happen for that long. It happened for about 4 or 5 years, and then people were like, "Oh, let's pull back on that."
Dylan went country. Let's everybody do that now.
But what I think is interesting now is there's this labels that started in the 90s, like as the first wave of true independent labels, are now 25 years old, and they have the line between major labels and large independent labels is very blurred. From an outsider, the budgets and stuff are along the same lines, and the office size and stuff like that. Like they're similar organisms, but there is I have found seems to be a very fundamental difference in how those independent labels were founded on very pure and accurate and honest principles, really. And like going back to Nirvana, like that time period,
like,
I mean, it's real.
Sub Pop did.
It's real. It's very real. But we're at the point now where those labels have bigger budgets, and they have the ability to facilitate their artists making exciting music and funding it in a way that is very encouraging, and supportive, but they don't have the same kind of oversight as a major label would, you know? And to me, there is this really interesting time where all of a sudden there's independent labels have grown to the point where they can fund exciting things, but they are still giving sort of the green light and thumbs up to, hey, man, you do what you want to do.
Yeah.
And, like, really go for it. And there is a little bit of a parallel there between what happened in the late 60s, early 70s, and
especially with now the 360 deal, which is a
Yeah.
very 70s idea,
Right.
which I think is a terrible idea,
Yeah.
that you would give up your
Yeah.
cloth, your touring,
Yeah,
and your
yeah,
and your merch, or and your publishing. The idea of giving your songs away like that, and basically handing someone your career and trusting them, and then you don't even know your PR person, you know
Right.
your A&R person, and their job security isn't like. I started when I was 19 and signed to DreamWorks, which within a week turned into Interscope because it died. So I met the president, and then she was fired or
Right.
left. And then I spent $95,000 of Interscope's money, and for 6 months, and up until like a week leading up to the stop, and then they said, "Sorry, man, can't sign you." And then put my drummer on the street, and he ended up okay. He's in One Republic now. But it's super weird. But he worked at Home Depot,
shit.
and then we did that, and then
Man,
he
I
was
wish
totally
we had-
screwed, and then he's in One Republic.
Wish we had started talking about that earlier. That's a story right there.
But
Damn.
but those kind of things where it's like, and then you get along and you build all this thing, and then maybe you can get a more fair shake deal-wise
Right,
with
yeah.
a larger company like that. But then it's like you end up giving up 6 records in your career, and what
Yeah.
if your A&R guy goes away?
Yeah.
Like, how much bargaining chip do you have as a small band, even if you're buzzing really hard?
Right.
Like, how much bargaining chip? You could take the money right then, but if you do that, where, like, your creativity to be able to kind of traverse what may happen in your band,
Right.
and wherever your creativity takes you, it's very hard to ride that line.
Yeah.
And you just kind of, I think, some people can do it really well because they have an understanding of what they want, and that's very
Right.
clear with everybody.
Are
Yeah.
you what's your label situation right now?
Well, we were on Rounder, and now we're on Dual Tone for a record, and they give us a really great, it's a one-off 50-50 split, just the dumbest, simplest, fairest thing.
Right.
And, just based off of what we've already done, they go, okay, this makes sense, you're worth about this. Is this
Yeah.
okay? It's like, yeah, that's great. If we recoup, we make half. If we don't, that was a bad move. Oops, somebody fucked up. But, and you get to choose your team and have your own PR and, like, be able to, like, create your own team and know that you can, like, pick up the phone and actually call that person. And if they're not doing a good job, that you can fire them and hire them and have a say with what money's being spent on your behalf.
Yeah. And with your band, how does it? Is it a band in the sense of it is equally collaborative, or?
I would say it's definitely extremely collaborative. Where say I wrote about 45 songs for the album. Kelly in my band wrote about 3, but he's just like edits himself
Right.
a lot. He's got a lot more songs than that, and then that gets put in a room and just gets put in the furnace. Like, everybody just burns it all into each other, and
Right.
that's what the voice is the conversation. Like,
Right.
it has to be a band.
Right.
That's what Delta Spirit is.
Right.
I know I said I would. Hold my hand up, hold my hand.
And you're making a solo record?
Yeah.
Is that something we can talk about in this
Yeah,
interview?
I made I've made a bunch of solo records actually that no one has heard except for my friends, and I've made them kind of as a tantrum from just that experience, the
Right.
Delta Spirit experience, where it's like you write these songs and you have this vision and you know you can complete them, and I truly believe that the art of Delta Spirit is that very thing, and I believe in it and I love it. But also I love recording music and playing music, and I have a side of me that's a little bit more raw and crazier, and I also have a side of me that's a lot quieter, and I want to be able to facilitate those things.
Right.
So a month after we recorded our record in February, I started working on a new record, and I've actually kind of recorded 2 records already.
Oh, nice.
So I'll figure out what to do with those next year, but
That's cool.
I really want to tour and just be in small clubs and do a 3-piece and be really simple and really intimate and focused and just about the music and not trying to like break through glass ceilings with your career or change anything, but just like be back, like do the things that I love.
Right.
You know?
That's very cool.
That's what our band's doing too this summer, which is so exciting together.
Right.
And it's like a coming home of like, it's, you know, there's the music business, but we want to do the music for a little bit.
That's nice.
What about you? You're kind of a solo artist, so you get to do what you want, ruling the roost.
It's interesting. You know, my solo artist thing, so it kind of came about in a very backwards way. I was sort of an I was sort of an arranger. I had a sort of an avant-garde jazz sort of psychedelic thing in the Wikipedia article.
Mm-hmm, I did.
Yeah. So I did that, and that was kind of like, I guess, sort of this coming out of jazz school. It was this just explosion of like ideas, you know, and just writing things down all the time, and we were playing all the time.
By avant-garde jazz, would you define that like Ornette Coleman?
Yeah, like sort of, yeah.
Like Skies Over America, or Shape of Jazz to Come?
More like Shape of Jazz to Come, probably, but a little bit more composed than that. Have you heard like Liberation Music Orchestra? Do you know those records? That's sort of the thing. It's a Charlie Hayden record with all Carla Bley arrangements. It's just so good. But anyway, so I had done that, but what was really unique about that wasn't so much the music, I think, but more the personnel that was in Richmond. I mean, the band was really good, but in Richmond, there's so many musicians. There's a great music school there, and there's just a lot of horn players, a lot of talent in that regard in terms of being able to play something written or whatever. And I began to kind of put this idea together for a record label that was based off of like house band models like Motown or Stax or that kind of thing. And I wanted to really facilitate opportunities for me to arrange and produce and bring in other artists and do that kind of like vertically integrated, like let's do it all here. Let's write the arrangements. Let's produce it. Let's engineer it. Let's do it in a week. Let's do 3 days of rhythm section, 1 day of strings, 1 day of horns, 1 day of background vocals, a day of whatever else, and call it, you know, and just see if we could do that, because I felt so encouraged by the
Muscle Shoals stuff.
I actually haven't watched that because
it's so good.
I haven't watched that because I dug so heavy into that. I've read so much about it, and like I just am scared.
Oh no,
I'm scared of it.
It's so good. It's just imagining, because I've like a friend of mine, Adam Landry, his studio. It's like there's one sound in his studio, and that sound is awesome. Mm-hmm. It doesn't do anything other than that thing.
Right.
But that thing is right, and that's like Muscle Shoals, and it's like that band. It's like anybody walking in with a band that funky, that like just.
Yeah.
And it's just funny that it's just a bunch of teenage white kids just crushing it.
Yeah.
But that's a really amazing thing to strive for.
Yeah, and so we had this really great... So we had that in place, and sort of... So we started this label with the idea that we would do that, and it was kind of... It's a lot of trust. It requires a lot of trust to ask an artist to come in for that. You know, hey, come in, you share your songs with us. We're going to be the rhythm section, and we're going to write string arrangements and horn arrangements and background singer arrangements, and we're going to produce this. And it's very heavy-handed. It's a very heavy-handed collaboration, and I mean that in they're soft hands, but they are extensive, you know, and like what we're doing with the music. So I felt like, and obviously I'd kind of started it because I did have a lot of production ideas, and I wanted to see it through. So I made Beginner really. I hadn't written songs before, and so I basically was like, okay, well, we're not really going to be able to get anybody else to come do this, you know, and then put their name on the record and like release it. And so I was like, well, I'll do it. I feel like I have something to say, and so I wrote some songs, and even at that point, I wasn't really singing, and it was like, okay, well, I got to figure out sort of the singing voice, like how I'm going to do this. And, but we did it. We recorded in a week, and it just came out so fresh sounding, I think to my ears at least. And then it really took on a life of its own, where, Domino picked it up and ended up releasing it, and it did really well overseas and fairly well here too. But although I was still kind of in charge, it was a weird thing because I was in charge of the release. It was my record, and it was a lot at once, like to have happen. And then this time around, going back into the studio, it was more about like going through that process again. I think as a recording artist, like it can be really easy just to like change the variables, and this isn't a bad thing. I think of like Beck always.
Yeah, sometimes
like
having like locking yourself out of stuff.
Yeah,
it's the best way to open up a lot of different things. Like Bo Coster had that in My Morning Jacket. They like committed to like there's going to be no B3 on Z.
Yeah,
that's just not going to exist, and it's like those sounds. That you get all this other thing.
Yeah.
You stretch, you reach, you find it.
And so for me, like, I wanted to just go back to the same process, go back to the same people, like the people I started the label with, because it's, it's a band. It's a bass player and a drummer and myself and another guy who writes the arrangements, and we split sort of arranging duties and go back to that and just dig deeper and see how get more. Cause, the great thing about having consistent musical relationships is it's not just that. Like Cameron, the bass player, is a good example. Like he's bad as shit, but it's not just that he can play amazing stuff. It's that at this point, me and him have been communicating for 10 years.
Yeah.
And so when I say something, he knows what I mean, and I can get from A to Z with him quickly and efficiently, and it can go to a really special place. Whereas if another producer just asked Cameron to come into the studio, it would be great, and Cameron would knock it out of the park. But they don't have the same vocabulary.
Yeah, it's not a kinetic energy that you can do.
And so for me, it's even though I am a solo artist and I'm sort of, I believe in putting my name on the records and they are my music, but I look at a record like What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, and that sort of to me is sort of a landmark record, and in the sense that it is 100% Marvin Gaye. It is so original. It is so personal. It's so it is so him. It is a Marvin Gaye record, but at the same time, the production on that and the string arrangements on that and the engineering, like, and even the songwriting actually is very team oriented and very collaborative, and to me, those are the most exciting records. So I'm sort of in a position where I sort of facilitate and oversee a team working in a way that helps me facilitate kind of the things in my imagination,
Yeah.
It's a really exciting and
so good to have
rewarding experience and like a very cool. I just am really fortunate to have, and being in a band, this too, but it's like you're only going to get so many of those relationships in your life.
Yeah.
There are only so many times you're going to sit with a drummer for 10 years and get into each other's musical world. Because
be high school friends.
Yeah, exactly.
And play off each other's songwriting. And like, I've stolen so many songs from Kelly. He starts and he's like, oh, I like that. He's like, this thing I'm working on, it's going to be pretty cool. I was like, oh, that's great. I'll come around. I'll finish the lyrics, write a bridge, and I'll fuck him. I'll just basically be like, I stole your song.
Yeah.
And great. He's like, oh, cool. Great. He's stoked about it. Like, there's to not have that ego and to have this, like, constant upping and going at it. It's good.
I have that
Jack
thing.
Michi, Phil Spector
Yeah.
thing.
I have a songwriting partner that we've been writing since we were 16,
And he's the guy that arranges?
No. He's just a
bud.
Kind of another guy that we songwrite together. The band, the Space Bomb band, we don't do any. I don't really songwrite with them too much. Just kind of do.
That's interesting. So you just have this other friend that you write songs with.
Yeah. And
wow.
we've been writing together since we were 16. And
so
but
fun.
he's friends. I mean, he's part of. He knows everybody.
Yeah.
We're all
If you're
part
in a clique, it's
part of the
that's what it is.
same family. But I write songs with Andy, and I bring that to the team, and I generally sort of lay out, it's this kind of thing, or this is a reference point, or
His
whatever.
name is what? Your friend?
Andy Jenkins.
Andy
is
Jenkins.
the songwriting partner.
Does he have his own records too?
No, he doesn't.
Why not?
He doesn't. I'm hoping to change that. I mean, I really want him to record. We had a band together that made records, but not.
Is it like a secret? Don't tell the name of the band.
No, it's the Great White Jenkins was the name of it.
Great White Jenkins.
Yeah, because it was the Matthew White, Andy Jenkins, that we got that name in.
It's hot.
In algebra class in 10th grade.
X plus Y equals Great White Jenkins.
Yeah, right, exactly. So hopefully Andy will. He's a really beautiful songwriter. I mean, I probably need him more than he needs me in terms of songwriting, but it's a really good relationship. And with this last record, just came out, we really kind of dug into each other, and like it's what's really cool about him in particular is that this record is so personal for me. But having a songwriter who is one of your best friends and who has been around you since you were 16, like you can write personal stuff, and you can talk about these songs as works of art that are separate from your personal life, just as sort of a craft.
Yeah.
But you can also connect them to like, hey, this is what I'm writing about, or this is what we're writing about, and he knows how I feel about things or where I was at a certain time emotionally.
And you're writing about this thing and that maybe you don't realize that you're writing about, but he's picking up on it and trying to pull that side out of it, or you know, looking at it from a Freudian like crazy way.
And so that's been a very cool thing where I guess that's sort of the stereotypical like downside of writing co-writes or whatever, is you sort of lose a little bit of the
cold call jam thing.
But for me it's been kind of a best of both worlds situation where I feel like I'm able to be as personal as I can possibly be. Yeah. And almost aggressively intimate in that way, and have Andy understand all of that and know all kinds of far out shit about my life that we're able to turn into a song because we've known each other for 17 years at this point.
Yeah. It's such a weird thing to just cold call a co-write.
Do you do that?
I have done that when I was like 19, and we're actually discussing doing it now as a band, just as an exercise kind of thing. I've been doing like sync license and sound design stuff to kind of help pay the bills, and I love the challenge of that. And I've had some real stinkers. I won't say who, but they've written some hit songs. And it was bad, man. It was real bad. But then I met this guy, Ron in Yellow. He produced the Bruce Springsteen Wrecking Ball record. And that guy was like one of the most underrated people I met. It was like an afterthought to like put me with him. Right. And he taught me so many tricks about songwriting when I was really young. And he's also like, oh, do you like Tom Waits? And I was like, oh, I love Closing Time. He's like, no. And he's like, Black Rider, Mule Variations, Rain Dogs, like just all these, like, you like Dylan? Yeah. Are you kidding me? You don't know another side of Bob Dylan? Like, here, to Ramona, learn every lyric, you know, like, you don't know what the 3 is, like, major 7 trick to the, the minor? And then, it's like those little things where it's like, find the bridge, know the tag, it's got to be good, cut, and all those things you just don't get. Like just the tools. You know, like all of those tools taught me so much.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, but
I'd actually like to do more of it. I sort of am attracted to that, like the coldness of it or whatever. It's like pure craft, It's like no emotional baggage or whatever. It's just
I don't know how to do that
like
side. I think I can do chords and a melody, and then I'll figure out lyrics later. I don't know how it's gonna go, but I'm interested in giving it a fun go. I'm such a different person. That's like 3 lifetimes ago, and a lot of alcohol that I drank, and then now I drink less. So I'm like, I'm 2 persons ago.
That you did.
I was a wide-eyed young person when I started doing that stuff. Or like co-writes.
Right. Yeah.
Now I'm a crotchety old songwriter, travel around. Yeah. Well, I feel like I know you now,
Yeah.
Matthew
nice.
B. White. Yeah, man.
We're about good for time. Great.
Sweet.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Man. It's really nice.
The radiance of an orange tree. You and me in the middle of a field. The fragrance of an orange blossom. You and me in the middle of a field. Oh, let me sleep.
And those guys kept talking animatedly as they walked out of the room and all the way down in the elevator. We hope Matt and Matthew stay in touch. This is Michael Azarad, Editor-in-Chief of the Talkhouse, and that's it for this episode of the Talkhouse Music Podcast. Thanks to our producer-engineer, Elia Einhorn. For more Talkhouse Music podcasts, and for lots of great writing about music by some excellent musicians, by all means visit thetalkhouse.com/music.